Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to the CQC Public Board meeting for June. Number of people to welcome around the table. Chris Usher, first board meeting you've been at, Chris, even though you've been our Acting Director of Finance for a couple of months now. So particular welcome to you. A welcome to David Noble, who I will introduce properly in a moment, but welcome. I think everybody else around the table are normal attendees, so nobody else I need to welcome at this stage. Liz Sace can't be with us today, so she has apologised. Is there any interest anybody needs to declare? Okay, that's good. Our minutes of the May 16th meeting, are they a true and accurate record of everything we discussed? Excellent, thank you very much indeed. Unusually, there are no outstanding items on our action log. Is there any matter arising that anybody needs to raise, wants to raise? Okay, that's good. So that takes us, David, straight to your report, and we're going to start with the independent investigation into Hill Green, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. As you've said, this item is the independent report into Hill Green. So about 12 months ago now, there was an article in the Times newspaper commenting on our regulatory oversight of a particular care home, 14 Corn Road, which was run by the Hill Green Group. And the article alleged that there had been a cover-up in the way that CQC had exercised its regulatory oversight. As a consequence of that allegation, that claim, I commissioned an independent review which was led by Sir Paul Jenkins QC, and the purpose of today's item is to receive that report. Now, one of the sad set of circumstances surrounding this case is not only the incident in relation to the individual in the home, but Sir Paul tragically died at the beginning of this year. The report was at completion. He'd virtually completed interviewing all the people he wanted to speak to. A significant part of the report had been drafted, but it wasn't completed upon Paul's sad death. Through Rebecca, David Noble stepped forward, having worked previously with Paul and being a solicitor by his own profession and background, and has completed the report for us. So what we've got today is a report by Sir Paul Jenkins and David Noble, which, subject to the discussion at the board here today, we would intend to publish in full at 12:30 today. Also, board members have considered the action plan, which has been worked on by the executive team. This action plan was instigated under Andrea's leadership back in the summer of last year, and meant that we were extracting from our own assessment of our oversight of Hill Green action to improve our performance and learn. That action plan will be has been updated in the light of the recommendations from Paul Jenkins and David Noble, and is also for the board to consider. David will say something in a second, but importantly, the independent report concludes that there was no deliberate cover-up in relation to our management of the regulatory oversight of Hill Green. And importantly, because the terms of reference invited Paul and David to comment on our regulatory oversight, they conclude that our oversight was, quote-unquote, far from perfect, and make a number of recommendations around how we approach consistency, how we induct staff, how particular issues are escalated within the organisation, and critically how incidents which have taken place are reported in our inspection reports and therefore are available to a wider public. And then lastly, how we engage members of families where there have been critical incidents. And our action plan is a response to the recommendations which David and Paul have made in their report. So I recommend that the board accept the independent report, and also recommend that the board accept the action plan as work in progress, with the further reports coming back to the board as a result of the scrutiny which will take place. But if I may just stop my introductions at that point, Peter, and invite Rebecca to just make some observations.
Thank you, David. So David Noble will present his report in just a moment. I have been asked to explain one matter before he does that, which is that the timing of ongoing criminal proceedings mean that in order to protect the integrity of those proceedings, the discussion today will focus on the recommendations for CQC, and it will avoid comment on the particular incident that is referred to in the report, and that was covered in the original Times article. So I'll hand over to David now.
Thank you, David and Rebecca, and thank you, members of the board, for inviting me. As David said, it's a slightly difficult moment for me because, regrettably, of course, Sir Paul died before he could complete the report. I think it's probably worth my saying that my estimate was that at least 85% of the report, nearly 90% of it, was either in final form or in almost complete final form. I carried out 2 further interviews. One was a re-interview, and the other was a final interview which Sir Paul had already planned, and he'd already noted what he wanted to pursue. So actually completing the task wasn't as problematic as it might otherwise have been had the report been less well developed. So with that as a preliminary, I think I would emphasise the 4 general overarching points that Sir Paul made in the first part of the report in the summary. The first is that not everything was perfect in the regulation of 14 Cone Road and in regulating Hill Green, but he, and certainly I, in my subsequent involvement, found no evidence whatsoever that there was any cover-up at CQC. And I think this is an important point just to emphasise. It's in relation to the choice of proceedings that CQC followed, with civil enforcement followed by criminal enforcement. And this is covered in more detail in the report, but I do think it's worth emphasising that CQC's interests at the time were in protecting the safety of individuals. Now, when you look at the enforcement powers that the Commission that you have, it's quite clear that civil enforcement is a much swifter method to ensure protection of individuals. And criminal enforcement, which is typically about prosecuting and holding people to account after the event, and using that as an example for the future, as well as punishment for the individuals, will inevitably come later, partly because the investigation process is longer, more thorough, more difficult to pursue, and more time-consuming. So I think that's to put that conclusion in its context. Second, I think it's important to say that there was, as I've said, a clear focus at CQC on ensuring that people were safe, and that's why that sequential action was taken. Now, both of us say that there are elements in that sequence which could have been quicker, and the recommendations address that. The third was to note, as we do, that CQC is an organisation committed to continuous improvement, and since November 2015 it has changed or is in the process of changing its approach significantly. And as a consequence, there are a number of the recommendations you will see where progress has already been made, and Sir Paul noted that as he went through the report. The fourth and final general point I think I'd make is the one that he makes about the fact that the focus of the investigation inevitably was on adult social care, because that was the setting that gave rise to the investigation. But some recommendations clearly have a read across to other sectors that CQC regulates, and that I think needs to be followed through. On the recommendations themselves, David has helpfully summarised some of the most important ones. I think I would only add to those a couple, and unsurprisingly, given both Sir Paul's and my background, they relate to the criminal and legal aspects. I think one of the important ones which needs to be dealt with relatively swiftly is the question about primacy in investigations, because in this case one of the issues which may well have led to the as we see it erroneous conclusion that the article made was that inevitably where there's a serious incident which gives rise to the potential of a serious criminal prosecution, the police will take the lead. And so here there was an inevitable delay whilst the police carried out their investigation and then consulted with the CPS before determining whether or not to prosecute those serious crimes which CQC can't prosecute. I think, though, that what's needed is quite clearly a memorandum of understanding with the National Police Chiefs Council and with any other regulator that CQC might overlap with in these circumstances, to ensure that investigations can proceed either in parallel or with less of a delay after the first more serious crimes have been investigated and decisions made. So that's the recommendation about primacy. One other that I ought to emphasise, because I know this from reading what Sir Paul had written to himself, as it were, in draft notes, is the approach that CQC is now taking in relation to criminal enforcement. I found considerable progress had been made in the way in which the powers which the new powers which had come to CQC were now being addressed and dealt with. CQC has adopted, as the report shows, one particular way in which criminal enforcement can be operated. Sir Paul had also identified an alternative, but was persuaded, as I am persuaded, that the approach which CQC are now following is perfectly feasible and workable, but it is something that I think needs to be kept under review. The only other ones, I think, are to ensure that there is a mechanism for ensuring that reports such as the Safeguarding Adult adults report that Enfield produced is picked up at a level not necessarily just at the local level. And there, I think, because of the nature of the recommendations which are made in those sort of cross-cutting reviews, it's important that CQC escalates those across the board. So it's not just dealt with in the region where the SAR is published or takes place. Beyond that, I don't think that I need to say a great deal, because the recommendations themselves stand as they are. I think there's one other generic thing which is worth saying, and that's about the legacy issues in relation to criminal enforcement. There was some question raised in one aspect of the investigation about whether at the time that notifications came in from 2015 onwards, the processes were sufficiently robust to pick up the sort of actions which would then need further enforcement. And looking at it after Sir Paul's death, I found no evidence that there was a defect in the way in which those notifications were being considered.
David, thank you very much. I mean, I'd like to put on the record, firstly, our gratitude to Sir Paul for the work that he did, because it was a quick response to a very difficult situation. I'd also like to put on the record my personal and the board's regret at his untimely death. I'd also, David, like to thank you for completing the task. I suspect you've been unduly modest in saying it was relatively straightforward. I suspect it was anything but relatively straightforward to pick up somebody else's work and complete it in the way you have. So thank you very much for doing that. There are a number of recommendations, which, as you say, some of which have been substantially or already actioned by work that was ongoing. Others we need to look at very carefully. So I think as a board, we will, of course, both accept the report and the recommendations. Can I just ask my colleagues if there's anything anybody wishes to raise, bearing in mind Rebecca's caution to us not to prejudice the criminal proceedings. Robert.
Thank you, Peter. Firstly, can I echo Peter's thanks to you and indeed to Sir Paul for the work that has been done here and the very clear report that we have. I'd just like, if I might, follow up a question from what you've just been saying about the approach to criminal enforcement, and I'd just like a bit of clarification. When you talk about the approach, do you mean the as it were, the managerial organisational approach to how we set about criminal enforcement, or do you mean the philosophy and policy which underlies that? Because you talk in the report about the difference between, or the priorities in relation to ensuring the safety of people as opposed to punishment, and it's obviously something which is quite a live debate in the healthcare world at the moment, and I just wondered which of those you mean, or maybe you mean both.
Yes, I mean, from both Sir Paul's perspective and my perspective, I think in relation to the policy side, we came at it from exactly the same position, which is that, and the conclusion in the report says this, that CQC had the right emphasis, that one should always seek to protect and safeguard individuals, and therefore using the powers that are available to the Commission to do that swiftly and with the least amount of fuss needs to be the priority. That inevitably, in our view, means that criminal enforcement as opposed to civil enforcement, and indeed prior to civil enforcement, even just inspections and the consequences of inspections, will inevitably come third in line, as it were, logically, partly because the first two will feed the third in terms of the evidence that has to be gathered. So it's not an issue about policy that Sir Paul raised. It was more about the managerial aspects and the approach that the executive were taking in relation to the support that is necessary to run effective prosecutions, especially with the powers that the Commission now has and the complexity of those prosecutions. These are not straightforward prosecutions given the nature of the regulations. And there were two possible ways. One is using specific inspectors to do that work. The other is to use support for inspectors, but not to hand over the prosecution work from, as it were, one inspector who's been involved with the case all along to somebody who then takes over the criminal work. From my own point of view, I was certainly persuaded that the approach which the Commission has adopted is it's perfectly workable, but I think it is something that the board may want to see evidence of as the prosecutions go through, that this solution to the evidence gathering and the processing and the disclosure obligations is being handled as appropriately as it can be.
Thank you very much.
Good. So, board, oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Lewis.
Thanks very much, Peter. Well, first of all, just to say I thought it was a really excellent report. It's very clear, very thorough. Its first conclusion, no cover-up, is very emphatically stated. But beyond that, it does make some quite wide-ranging comments about the CQC processes. You've mentioned them already, but responsiveness to families, clarity of decision-making, consistency, our role in criminal prosecutions, and so on. It goes without saying that the role of the board, I suppose my point here is about the role of the board, needs to be. We need to have a clear reassurance about how these issues are taken forward, what actions are taken, and by what timescale. So that would be very important to hear that. But then there is a specific reference to the board in the report, which is about the point at which this incident was notified to the board. And the report, it's under the section on escalation, and it just makes reference to the fact that it's not clear what response we made, and in fact it's not completely clear what we were told. And I think this raises a more general point that we will have to take notice of, and that's our responsibility when a serious incident occurs. What are we told, how, when, and what's the right response for us? And I just want to record that I think this is something we will have to clarify in the action plan that goes forward.
So I think the action plan will come to future board meetings, and it will be an action plan that deals not just with the specific recommendations in the report, but also some issues that get raised in the body of the report. Absolutely, to your point, Lewis, we will, as a board, then be able to monitor how we, as an organisation, are dealing with all those points. And I think the point, David, that you made in answer to Robert's question is also something which we will monitor, Rebecca, as time goes on. These are complex areas, as you say, and we need to make sure that our response is the most effective that it can be. So, unless anybody has anything else to raise, can I? So the report will be published, the recommendations will be adopted and followed through, as I've just said. And David, can I thank you again for both coming today, but also for the work that you've done, so that we were able to publish the report without any further delay. I'm very grateful to you. Thank you. Thank you. David, back to you.
If I may, on the thanks, Peter, if I can just say thank you to our staff, who I know cooperated fully with both David and Sir Paul, and that's commented on as well. And I think that says much, not just at the way the board have received the report, but at the way that staff have joined in the discussion to help us understand what went on and what we improve as well. So I think amongst the thanks to David and others, thanks to staff as well. So there's rather a lot on this report. So if I may, I will try and do this at pace. And I've got one or two supplementary points which have arisen since this report went to board members and went on our website. But the first item is a performance report, and I don't intend to present each individual aspect of this, but consistent with the emergent practice, the first paragraph is that work which is on plan, and examples are of our HR indicators, customer services response, the progress in relation to completing inspection in hospitals and primary medical services. And then the following paragraphs are those areas where performance is not quite at the level that was set out at the beginning of the year, and there's some analysis and explanation of why. In the interest of time, Peter, I'm not going to go through those and present it. I think there may well be questions around the table. So I think it's probably a better use of time if I just leave the presentation at that and then invite board members to ask questions. Thank you.
I agree. Thanks, David. Questions? Well, oh, sorry. Go on. Paul, did you have a question? Sorry. Performance, yeah.
David, I wonder whether you could say something about the technology problems in March and April and the slowdown in systems then, and whether there's anything there that we need to be thinking about.
Yes, so I think we're in the process of looking at our sort of support systems. I think we've got an aged estate in terms of our IT. Some of it is creaking at the seams, but we have got a programme to refresh and update that. And I think what we're looking at the moment is how much money we're spending on our legacy systems to keep the lights on and keep them running. And I think there is some work going on around our architecture and our process in place at the moment to sort of shore it up. And we've done some work over the last couple of weeks on increasing bandwidth and also putting in a bit more resilience into the system. So that should stabilise the situation, recognising that it is going to get considerably better over the coming months as the new stuff comes on stream.
Lewis.
Could I just ask about the reference in the report, in the written part of the report actually, about the difficulties in adult social care inspections and the meeting or not meeting targets. So, for example, the reference to the inspection of requires improvement in adequate services. So the target is 90%, our performance was 60%. The first inspections target is 80%, our performance was 33%. Is that related to the same issue of IT, or is that a staffing issue? That seems there's a huge volume of work to do. Don't get me wrong here, but those figures are substantially below our target.
Yes, indeed, they are, Lewis, and I'm sorry that that's the case. It's not where we want to be. The conversations that I've had with the team to get underneath that and to understand why it is that we are off target in such a dramatic way. The first point is around staffing. So, as you know, the business plan set out that we would recruit some additional staff to support our inspection activity and particularly to help us to focus on risk. We ensured in terms of the way that we were building up the budget, we did not anticipate having everybody in post at the beginning of April, and there is a kind of a ramp up of that so that we would expect to have people in post by the end of Q1, so at the end of this month and moving into July, and we have made considerable progress with that, but obviously we've got to get the bodies in, we've got to get them inducted and able to do the inspections. What we are also doing is looking at different ways of working, because we need to be sustainable as we are going forward, and given the potential of risk impacting on the quality of adult social care services, we need to make sure that we've got ourselves into a position where we can manage that activity to the best possible effect, and that is looking at a bit more of a skill mix in the teams, so that we can, some of the activity that inspectors are currently doing, others can do, so we can release more time for inspectors to actually get out there and inspect. The second issue to say is we do have a backlog of inspections, and so there is going to continue to be a missing of, as we're clearing that backlog, there will be a missing of the target as we clear that backlog, but absolutely we've got to clear the backlog. The other issue to identify is that the team are indeed responding to risk. One of the reasons why it looks a bit odd that we're going back to good services ahead of some others is that we are going back on the basis of information that people have shared with us that gives us a concern that the rating that is there on the website is no longer valid. And in one particular area in the country, one of my Deputy Chief Inspectors did do a look at those good services that we'd gone back to, if you like, early in response to risk. Only all but one changed their rating. So actually we were kind of acting appropriately on the information that we got and judging that risk appropriately. So that was kind of reassuring, but it still doesn't help us in terms of the overall picture. And the last point to say is that yes, there are problems. There have been problems with the IT that has impacted on people. If there are outages, they may not last that long, but it's the amount of work that you've lost, in terms of it happening, and the recovery and the frustration and all of those sorts of things that impact on staff. So, that's why the work with Kirsty's team around ensuring that we are supporting the legacy systems, which are absolutely vital for our ongoing work, is done. And last but not least, we are obviously also looking at whether there are any performance issues that we need to tackle in terms of providing people with additional support, either around report writing or around training in other aspects. So that work is ongoing as well. But I think, what I would also say in terms of the response to risk is that the percentage of enforcement that we're taking is increasing, and you can see that, and that is more time consuming and is having an impact on people. So there are a variety of reasons. We are very mindful of it. We do not want to miss these targets, and we're working very hard, and the teams are working very hard to try and address it.
Thank you. Right, Robert, then John.
My question was about something in your report, David, the unexpected number of calls received about the Alfie Evans case, which was the very distressing, controversial case about a baby at Great Ormond Street. Alderhay, I'm so sorry. I don't want to comment on the case itself, but it raised a question in my mind as to whether, in relation to a controversy and public concern about something like that, whether really the CQC is the right place for people to contact, whether through a campaign or otherwise, and if not, what anyone's meant to do. So I just wonder whether there's a misconception about what we're here for, but I may be wrong, and maybe there are perfectly valid reasons where a case like that raises issues for us.
I think it's ever such a good point, and one of the slight paradoxes of if Chris Day was here, he'd say in 2012 our unprompted recognition was about 22%. I think he'd now say it's about 72%, i.e. people know who we are. And if you remember, this was one of the debates about workload in the Public Accounts Committee. The more we get known, the more people will refer to us. The more people refer to us, the more work that generates. And we've been trying to accommodate that. So the team are normally very good, and the engagement team are normally very good at flagging where there's a report out which is likely to produce a spike in referrals. Panorama programmes, particular reports presented in the media of incidents of abuse are likely to lead to a spike in calls to the customer service centre up in Newcastle. I think you're right, Robert. I think there is an issue about what is it that we can do with it. But I think what I'm trying to say is because people now know who we are, our website says, tell us about your experiences. It's a really tricky issue when people do tell us not necessarily about their experiences, but about their views, and we happen to be the repository to them. I think a number of these cases can be quite distressing because it prompts people. It's a bit like when sexual abuse allegations are made and then people disclose themselves about something that's happened. It's distressing for the individuals, and I think it's pretty tricky for our staff as well. But I don't know what the solution is, Robert, other than we prepare our staff for when these things happen. I think we were not surprised by the decision that then led to the increase. I think it was the volume of the increases that took us aside. I mean, if you look at it on the graph, the spike is pretty significant, quite frankly, over and above. I haven't committed the figures to memory, but the figures were pretty impressive in their size. But again, I think it comes back to some of the things I know the board have commented on, which is the support of those people taking the calls up at the customer service centre. And I think, in tribute to Tracy Forrester and her team, I think they are really pretty sophisticated in how they deal with these kind of incidents now.
Kirsty, I think you might want to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to add that those calls were generated by a Facebook campaign, and it said specifically call CQC. Here's the number, and we handled it really, really well. But I think we took the calls in that day were what we would normally handle in a month or two.
Yeah. So that was that. John, you were going to raise something probably different point?
No, I was going to raise exactly the same point.
Oh, okay.
But also because it was a Facebook campaign, that the people perhaps involved in that campaign, no matter how tragic, need to understand the negative impact it has on other members of the public when contacting CQC. But it was the same point.
Okay. Anything else anybody wants to raise on the performance report? Good. Okay, David, on to the next item, which I think is the market oversight.
So if I take the rest of this at some speed, Peter, if I may. So paragraph 3, just wanting to update the work that Stuart Dean and Andrea take forward for us in relation to market oversight. You were briefed last month on the oversight of provider Orchard, which is the first Stage 6 notification that we've made in relation to service failure and business failure. And the team continue to work hard given what's in the public domain. We can mention these names on both Four Seasons and Allied Healthcare. So their workload pressures have been eased somewhat by an appointment of a key member of staff who's in the process of joining them. Next item, fit and proper person. Since our last meeting, there's been a written ministerial statement to Parliament announcing the terms of reference for the review of the fit and proper person requirement. This has been around for a good few months now. And alongside this announcement, Tom Cart QC was announced as the lead reviewer, and that review begins pretty quickly. Next month, and is an important issue. The important issue to point out is a review will consider the scope of the operation and the purpose of fit and proper persons. So it's not just about what we have done, but it is about, is this regulation attempting to deliver the policy ambitions of government. So I think this, those review terms of reference are pretty important. In paragraph 5, our objective was just to advise that we have been asked and we will submit evidence to a review that the GMC have introduced into gross negligence, manslaughter and culpable homicide cases, which is as a result of a particular case that the GMC have considered. And that review for the GMC will be carried out by Dame Claire Marks, previous President of the Royal College of Surgeons. But since this report was drafted, Sir Norman Williams has published a review that he was asked to undertake by the Department of Health, also on this issue of gross negligence by manslaughter. His report was published on Monday of this week, and there are in his recommendations some implications for CQC. These are my words, not his, but where there is a particular case, the CQC inspection may well be used to provide the broader context within which a particular incident may have taken place. So one of the things that we need to do is consider Norman Williams's review and the implications for CQC, as well as submit evidence to the GMC's case. And once those recommendations are made, and I think they're scheduled to be made in early 2019, we'll have to review those as well. So that what that means is some quite sensitive and delicate issues that when Ted's team are out inspecting may well get raised as part of the review about these issues. We've also given evidence this week to the Joint Committee in Parliament. This is Commons and Lords, which come together to provide pre-legislative scrutiny for the Health Service Safety Investigation Bill, which sets up the Health Investigations Board, which at the minute is part of NHS Improvement, and establishes it as a legal entity in its own right and gives it its legal duties, and it ceases to become a board and will become a body. And there are some important issues there, and it's here for colleagues to note. I wanted to put into the public domain the fact that some work on general practice provider information collection, this is where we would use a particular digital tool to collect information on GP performance, which we'd anticipated launching in the autumn of this year, has been deferred until April 2019. The reason for this is to give us sufficient time to ensure that the required testing is in place, so that by the time this is launched, we are absolutely confident of the product that we've got. I think we arrived at the view, but by trying to do this in the autumn, we couldn't satisfy ourselves that we would have done the requisite testing. Consequently, the reason for deferral. The work will continue. Paragraph 8, I draw attention to, and this is, I'm specifically asking the board to agree to this statement, some work that we've undertaken on modern slavery, and Lucy Wilkinson, who leads on our work on equalities and human rights, who I think will be known to many in the board, is sat with members of the public, such as Lucy's commitment to the work. But one of our Equalities and Human Rights days that Lucy organised, the Modern Slavery Commissioner's Office made a presentation about the incidence of modern slavery. And if you think that one of the risks of modern slavery is its occurrence within low-paid, often low-skilled workforces, and that's exactly the workforce that very often is available in adult social care. And there is a historic case of modern slavery going back, I think, to 2010 that the Commission has dealt with. Then it seemed important, Peter, that we considered our position in relation to modern slavery. So only private sector organisations with a turnover above, I think it's £5 million, that are required by law to produce a statement on modern slavery. I think NHS England, however, also have on their website a statement in relation to modern slavery. So Lucy's led some work on our behalf, following discussions with staff within the organisation, with the Commissioner for slavery, to modern slavery, to actually work on the statement which is appended to the report that we're considering at the minute. I'm grateful to Lucy for her work and getting us to this position. I think what we've got is a clear statement of, if we found this through our regulatory activities, what would we do? If there were circumstances where victims of modern slavery were being cared for, whether there's any regulatory requirements for us, not necessarily so is the answer to that, but there potentially could be. How would we deal with this? But I think this is an example of some good work across the Commission, but I think also a good example of the way that we're now confident in working with other organisations. So when I come to the end of this report, Peter, I'll invite the board to hopefully agree to the statement, and that will go up on our website. 9 is just an update. We continue to work on staff training and implementation on the General Data Protection Regulation. I've also signed the Armed Forces Covenant. This reflects the work that Ruth Rankin in Steve's team and Steve has done within the inspection team on inspecting armed forces primary medical services, where we've now completed that round of inspections of armed forces primary medical services bases, and indeed the Ministry of Defence wanted to renew the contract, so I think we've started to actually do repeat visits and go around again. And I'm very clear from having spoken to the Surgeon General that they think this is making a contribution to improvements in the quality and standards of their work. And the Armed Forces Covenant is effectively a covenant of those organisations that support the work of the armed forces signing up just to make that commitment. And I think what this will mean is that there'll be a logo on our website to actually give some impact to that. But I know there's a number of our staff who are immensely proud of the work that they've done in that respect. I have to say, as I am too. Paragraph 11 is just to flag on recent publications, Andrea's work on improvement in adult social care, and today the work on the inpatient survey, which I think has some pretty important messages, quite frankly, about how certain standards and levels of performance are being maintained across the NHS in relation to patient care. And then 12 is flagging up-and-coming publications, improvements in general practice. We've got a consultation response that we publish later that I think you'll consider later today. Learning from safety incidents at the end of June, the local systems reviews in the beginning of July, and then improvement in health and care about individuals who've made a difference. So if I stop presenting at that point, Peter, if there's questions, I'm sure we'll do our best to answer, but if I could invite the board to indicate their support for the work on modern slavery, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So let's take questions first, and we'll come back to the modern slavery endorsement in a moment. Steve, you.
Sorry. The driving improvement document for GP is out today, and it does include one of the practices, RAF Scrumpton Medical Centre in Lincolnshire, so one of the armed forces practices which has improved as part of that review. But it's an interesting document showing improvement, demonstrating improvement. It's not just the practice, but it's the million or so patients that are now in practices that have improved in quality, which is a real credit to our teams outside inspecting practices, the rating of practices, but also the practices themselves recognising there's a problem and improving, which we're really pleased about.
Thank you. Jane, were you? No, you weren't. Sorry, I wasn't sure. Sorry, Mike, got carried away there. Anybody else want to raise anything on David's report? So if not, can we just then formally endorse the modern slavery statement? Yeah, good. Done. Thank you.
You've made Lucy happy, Chair,
well,
so thank you.
I think it's really important, so I'm glad we've done it. Good. So, David, is that?
Yeah,
that's you done? Excellent. So, Paul, will we come to the annual report from the Audit and Corporate Governance Committee, please?
Thank you, Peter. As you will have seen from there are two papers here. One is the annual report, and then the other is a very brief summary of what we did at our last meeting of the ACGC last week. And as you will see from that, we spent a lot of time on the year-end processes around the annual report and accounts, which the board will be looking at later on this afternoon. So at that time, we produce an annual report which basically summarises everything that we've been doing during the year to support the approval of the annual report and accounts. And this is that report. Because it's a summary of what's gone on during the year,
There is nothing in here, I think, which is new to people, so I don't propose to go through it. I think the one thing I would bring out is the audit reports that have come from internal audit during the year, and I think that demonstrates continuing level of improvement. As members may recall, these reports are there's a four level of assurance, that is, 4 different levels of assurance which are given. I can't think where we've seen 4 levels of things, report ratings given before, but it's a standard way that the internal auditors across government and actually beyond government rate their reports, starting with substantial at the very top, which is very, very strong, moderate, which actually in our speak will probably be good or something of that level. And then limited, which is that there are some points which need to be looked at, and then below that no assurance, nil assurance. There were, as you look at paragraph 14, you'll see that this year there were 18 reports, last year 24. That's not a reflection of doing less work. It's a reflection of the individual reports were probably wider in scope and therefore took longer. And the proportion of limited reports were, and there were no unsatisfactory ones, the proportion of limited reports was there only 2 limited reports this year as against 6 last year. So I think that demonstrates a level of improvement, which is good to note. And the management assurance process, which again we'll talk a little bit about this afternoon, also supports that kind of level of comfort that the board can have in the processes of the organisation. The 2 limited ratings ones were around 2 aspects. One was around disaster recovery, which we talked about last time, which the board will look at proposals to. It's a very limited area of IT disaster recovery that we need to just look at what we might do on that. It's not at all to do with anything to do with cyber security or anything like that. It is just disaster recovery. And it relates to our arrangements with outsourced providers, essentially, or other providers in there. And the other limited rating was around some follow-up work on looking at hospitals and the hospital inspectorates reporting the timeliness of getting their reports out, essentially, and which is something which we've talked about several times here, and which we'll be coming back to again, I think, on that. So probably not surprising that there was a limited rating there, but I think some work is going on that in TEDS, and we as a board and we as an ACGC will be looking at that over the next few months as well. So I think that in relation to the annual report is, I'd just ask the board to note that annual report.
So does anybody want to, because it's a note and comment, does anybody want to comment, or are we happy just to note the report? Paul, could I just say thank you to you and the people on your committee, because I know that those of us not on the committee, and I think, David, you in particular as the accounting officer, derive huge comfort from the work that the committee does. It's a very effective committee. I would also like you to pass on thanks to Linda Farrant, the independent member, who I think adds huge value as well. But I do commend what you do. I think it's of great value to this board, so thank you. So we'll note your report, and then you want to do a quick update?
There's not a lot to talk about in here at the moment, because a lot of the work, as I say, is around the annual report and financial statements, which we'll be discussing later, which is still in draft and obviously will come out in a few weeks' time. The one point I would bring out, we had a session with Healthwatch England Chief Executive and one of the Healthwatch England, their own ACGC Audit Committee board members, and looking generally at the risks within Healthwatch England. And I have to say it was a very good session, And we particularly spent some time on the pressures, not on our organisation, Health Watch England, but upon the local Health Watch is who are doing a lot of the work which our organisation tries to support and pull together and assimilate. And the main point which we spend time on was the intense pressures that those local health watches are under for funding and the various ways they are looking to respond to that funding pressure. But it is getting very tough for them, and there is almost, I think we were talking about sort of existential problems for some of these organisations, and that we asked that the chief executive goes away and looks with her team, as they would be doing anyway, and with Jane, at what ways that we can look to try and mitigate some of this these risks around it.
Jane, do you want to add anything?
Just very briefly to thank the Audit Committee for that consideration, and I know David has some very helpful thoughts. It is a very serious problem out there in that of the £40 million that was originally allocated to Local Health Watch, it's headed below 30 and it's not heading in the right direction. It's going down beyond that, and it's so it is an existential threat, as you say. We have been working on this over the years, and really from January onwards, we've given it a complete focus. And so all ideas and thinking, please. It is the problem of money being passed from one government department out into the local authority world. It cannot be ring-fenced according to the current thinking, and it means that it makes it more difficult for all concerned, recognising pressures on local authorities as well. But thank you for your support.
So Health Watch is really, is really important, and we have to make sure that the existential threat does not come to an existential ending. So we really do need to make sure that we find ways of making sure that the local health watches can continue their really important work. Good, thank you. So I think we move on. Mary, how nice to see you. Mary, we had quite a long session at a previous board meeting on the work you've been doing over the past year. So we'll probably not spend as long today as we would if this had all come into one session. But it is quite a moment, isn't it? This is the first annual report of the Freedom to Speak Up activity. So over to you.
Thank you. So it's feeling very pleasing to have reached the stage of the first annual report. I am hoping that you have all read it, and so I won't take you through it in any sort of detail. I'd just like to highlight a couple of points, and also to give you a sense of how the pace of this is joining up with other forces at play within CQC. So this has never been just about providing support to people who want to speak up and protecting them and enabling them to do that well. This is about actively promoting speaking up as a way of life within CQC and becoming the sort of place where any concerns are welcomed, where people speak up well, are listened to well and responded to well. And we are on a journey with that, along with the NHS and other organisations, of course. The work that the board will be familiar with around shaping our future has also had a real connection here, and one of the key issues highlighted by staff in the conversations around that is the need to feel connected. And there is a whole piece of work going on with that, which the board will have seen around, particularly for the home working based staff, how we can help them to feel connected. And I think the ambassadors that have been recruited in the name of Speak Up will be a real force for good in this. Let me just say on the policy that not only do we reflect the national guidance, but with the help of the National Guardian's Office, we went to those trusts that that office considered do this best and took the learning from them. The reference group has kept me on the straight and narrow in terms of having a group to answer to in between times that I answer to yourselves. You may have noticed that I put you all down as the sponsor because this is where I report to and where I will come directly to in the event of any key trouble. The ambassadors are an amazing bunch. They display our values in full force. All 3 training courses so far have just been a joy. There's a real willingness to take this on. There are a number within the group who have their own direct experience of speaking up, and of course they bring a special something to the group because of that. I have detailed, as far as I'm able, without breaking any confidences, the type of concerns that have been raised, and they reflect absolutely the type of concerns being raised in the NHS. We do have some exceptions to that, where people have raised concerns about decisions that have been taken, and it's been delightful to see, and there's some small detail about it there, how that was taken forward and welcomed and action taken. The Guardian's office, it's a great relationship. As I come from hospitals, I've been involved in the inspecting of this out there. That has been helpful, I think, for the first Guardian, to have that extra insight. And they're very supportive in coming and talking to staff too. I've also been delighted to accept a number of invitations. Last week I had the opportunity to speak twice to customer and corporate services, and the quality of the debate on those calls and of the questions that came forward were really heartening in terms of the widespread support there is for this. Next year is about making those ambassadors as effective as they can be and doing far more of the promotional work. And I'll bring you an update in the autumn. I'll be asking the board to note the report and pleased to take any questions.
Thanks, Mary. Any questions or comments? Lewis?
Well, this is obviously really important, very good work. So I don't want my question to sound churlish. But in having 35 concerns raised, and I think that was by 47 people, so it was actually 47. Is that something like the number we would expect? Given that we have 96 ambassadors and 47 complaints, that means we have twice as many ambassadors as we have complaints. I just want to get an idea of the scale that we would expect. Is that right? Is that the right ratio? Is that not enough? Is it too many? What have people done beforehand? So these 47 people, did they use alternative ways of raising their concerns before they got to the point of making a direct approach in through the system? And so I'm trying to gauge what I should conclude from those numbers.
Mary and then Ted? Yeah, go on, Mary, you go first, then Ted.
The number is an interesting question. If we look at relative size within the NHS, which is our best guide, there doesn't seem to be any pattern related to size, or indeed related to the resource put into the Guardian. So I think it's an emerging thing. It's still very new. In terms of had people been anywhere else before, there's been a mixture. Some people came to me as a last resort. Others, the first conversation they'd had. So a very preliminary conversation, and we just talked through where they might go and what they might do. And having checked in with them, they'd raised it at the next one-to-one, brought it up at a team meeting, and that was that. That's the real success to me, to get it early. Some places are measuring the fall in the number of grievances as a marker of impact. We haven't adopted that so far. We have very few grievances. So the fact there's any at all, I think, is some mark of success. We won't ultimately measure this by the number of cases that I can report. That will be an important part of it, but the important thing will be the staff survey and how whether people feel this is a safe place to raise a concern about how we work. It's 42% at the moment. That's a declining figure. I think we need to look out for halting that and increasing that significantly as a true reflection of this being a place where speaking up has become a way of life.
Ted.
what you were just saying there, Mary, is exactly what I wanted to say. This is not about numbers of cases. This is about the change of culture we're trying to create. And to come back to what I wanted to ask, I mean, you've said before on several occasions that leaders often totally overestimate how approachable they are. And, you know, I think we need to be conscious of that. So have you a sense that not just in terms of numbers, but there is a changing culture out there? Do we have to wait for the staff survey to see that, as you suggest, or do you get a feeling that things are moving in a positive direction?
Well, all the signs are that it's positive in terms of the goodwill behind this and the acceptance of it as the right thing to do. I think there's less evidence yet of changes in individual behaviour and team behaviour. I think this time next year, I hope that's what we can say, and that people will be socialising that in conversation. But it is, and in the developments for this coming year, is support for managers about responding well, because it'll be quite something when the speak up volume rises, and we want to make sure that when it does, we respond really well.
Yeah, come back on that, because just as you were talking there, I was thinking, is there a room for us as senior managers and leaders in the organisation to actually be trained about how well we should respond? If we overestimate how approachable we are, we've got to show leadership in this, and we need to be confident that people will raise concerns with us and feel free to raise concerns with us. So do we need to do more as a board or as executive directors?
I'm going to say yes to both of that, and I'd be delighted to support the board in that.
Go on, Andrea, and then Malta.
And in a way, it's just to follow on from that conversation, because I think Mary's absolutely right. What we want is a culture where people feel capable and confident of raising a concern and knowing that it will get listened to and responded to appropriately. And I think that we are seeing some changes with that, but I do think it depends on those of us at a senior level being good role models for that, and demonstrating that when people do raise issues with us, that we consider what we're going to do about it, and we also absolutely crucially feed back, because one of the things that I think gets picked up is people feel that they're raising issues and it goes into a void and they don't know. So yesterday I had an email, or on Monday, sorry, I had an email from an inspector raising concerns about something. I escalated it, I responded to her and told her what I'd done and that we'd listened to it and all of those kind of things. And the email I got back was just fantastic, because she clearly felt very appreciated, and her head of inspection has circulated the whole blooming thing to the region now. But just as a demonstration that actually that there has been a response. So I think there is something about us being good role models in this.
Malta.
Thank you very much, Mary. So 2 points to make. One is I am one of your ambassadors, and I'm very proud to be, and I can only recommend the training to anyone who'd be willing to do. So if there's more interest from our leadership, then I really recommend doing that. The second point I wanted to make is that I think we should look at the staff survey and how it comes out this year. I also think that as we continue to ask for 360 feedback at all levels of the organisation, we should be very clear that we want to understand how we come across to our colleagues and how we're responding to concerns as part of that. I think it's personal feedback that we should all be asking for.
Robert.
Firstly, I've really encouraged by what we see here, and particularly by the number of ambassadors you've recruited. I think that the way to spread the culture is by having this ever-increasing, as it were, I know up to 100 is fine, group of people who are committed in all parts of the organisation. And if I may say so, it looks to me, as I haven't got the evidence, that we probably have a higher proportion per staff, head of staff, of ambassadors than probably any NHS trust, and there may be a lesson for them to learn from that. Secondly, I think can I commend the whistleblowing, or the freedom to speak up policy, which I have to say is a model of clarity compared with the pretty low bar set by quite a lot of the NHS in that regard. It's a document which seems to be any one member of staff ought to be able to understand and follow. But the third is finally a question in relation to the hint you give in your report of a few practical difficulties about, for instance, getting people to training and so on. And I wanted to know whether that was is it your perception that's due to a behaviour and lack of understanding of some levels of management, or genuine lack of resource, and whichever it is, what you're doing about that?
I think it's a mixture. I think there are moments of operational crisis that mean people have to divert. What I'm doing is talking to those line managers and persuading them of the importance of releasing staff and the fact this is a corporate agenda and a social movement that we want to be part of, and that in fact getting involved in this work I think will increase individual effectiveness and team effectiveness. So I think there's a real reason, an incentive for line managers to release staff to be involved.
Mary, a huge thank you. You have a pretty big job apart from doing this, and you've, I think, thrown body and soul into this work. Your enthusiasm and commitment to it just shines through from the written report, but also from your presentation today. So, just on behalf of everybody, thank you very much for what you've done. Please continue the work. It really is important. And you promised us an update in the autumn, and I look forward to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good. So it seems to be like sort of end of term feeling. We've got another annual report, Lewis. This one from your good self, from the RGC.
Yes, the RGC Regulatory Governance Committee, which I've chaired since for most of the last year since Michael Meyer stepped down. Several members of the board are on RGC. There are others who can't keep away and therefore attend. Peter, you come yourself regularly. And the RGC in the last year, I think, has had two sort of parallel tracks in a way. It's continued the previous role of, in a sort of rotational way, examining different parts of the system that we regulate. So it's received reports on adult social care, on primary medical services, on hospitals directorate, so we do that at each meeting in a regular way. And it's worth just saying that in passing that one of the things that's revealed is the diversity of PMS, because we've heard about some of the work in defence medical services, online primary care, and in dentistry. So and before that in criminal justice. So it's been a very useful place where perhaps those areas of CQC's responsibility are fully aired in a way and at a level of detail that isn't always allowed by time at the board itself. So that function of informing board members has been very important. It obviously provides comment back towards the chief inspectors and executive team, comment on issues of concern, on future priorities, on our methodology, and on the likely content of the State of Care report. So there's a two-way dialogue which we've continued. The second track has picked up some of our other areas of responsibility, and perhaps in particular we've tried to focus on subjects like improvement, I suppose, picking up on our role in driving positive change in the system, as well as reflecting back as a sort of mirror held up to the system. So, for example, we talk quite a bit about re-inspection and about learning, and we have relatively recently talked about the improvement initiative that CQC is engaged in. So it's been a very full year, and as things stand, we expect to continue those two tracks. Rotational discussion of our the key areas that we regulate, and a second track of largely improvement-based specific topics. I should say that just one final thing in view of today's discussion, that one of the other areas that we've talked about in detail and are planning to return to is our role in criminal prosecutions. So I'll leave it there. This report is to note.
Mark.
Chairman, If I could just respond to Lewis about serial attenders. I'm not stalking you. I just want to say that by attending these meetings, I found it extremely helpful as part of my induction into being a NED in this organisation, because you cover the whole remit of the organisation, and the presentations that I've attended have been, really excellent. So thank you.
Steve.
Yeah, thank you. From an executive point of view, it's a big thank you, really, for the way you've been chairing this committee, because certainly in PMS, a lot of the work we do, particularly for the most vulnerable in society around prisons, detention centres, is work which is really important to maintain and improve quality, often in partnership with Ofsted and the Probation Service and prisons inspectors, and it's given my team the opportunity to really share what they're doing and feel valued. And so the feedback, once we've been to your committee, has been hugely positive, and I think the constructive challenge has also helped, because it's helped us then think about other areas and to follow up on some of those discussions. We've been to see ministers about health across prison service with Paul Elliott and others, and it's been, I think it's a really valuable part of what we do. So thank you.
And just to add to Mark's comment, after 2.5 years here, I still get huge value out of coming. It's not just my induction is taking a little longer than yours, Mark, might do. But seriously, it is a very valuable forum, and I thank you very much for what you've done. So, Board, we're happy to note the report. And that takes us on to the people update. Now, so Ruth is on a course, I think, at the moment, so she's not joining us. But Kirsty, you're going to pick it up, please.
Yes, thanks, Peter. So what we've got today is an update of our sort of people strategy and the work that we're doing in that space. So I will just sort of put a few highlights out of the report that we sent in earlier. So just in terms of, just to recap, our key priorities are around our efficiency and our effectiveness for CQC, embedding the QI methodology in the organisation, embedding the intelligence-led shared view of quality work that we're doing, ensuring we've got the right skills and capability in the organisation to do all of that work, and also making sure that we provide a healthy working environment for our staff, and following on from our sort of values of making sure we're embedding our values of excellence, caring, integrity and teamwork in all the things that we do. So that's our sort of overarching priorities for the People Directorate. But I just wanted to sort of put out a couple of areas for us to focus on. So I think the key area that we're looking at, some of the key areas we're looking at at the moment are the question of what are the resources and the capability that we need over the next 3 to 5 years for this organisation, given the strategic changes that are taking place out there in the sectors that we regulate, and what does that mean for us in terms of the capability and the capacity that we need. So we're just starting to do some thinking on that around skills, capability and organisational design, and we will bring we'll bring some work back to the board in the autumn once we've done a bit more thinking in that space. We're also looking at our attraction and retention policies and what we need to do, what policies we need in place to ensure that we can keep and attract the workforce that we need for the organisation moving forwards. And we're also, as part of that, looking at our workforce strategy. One of the things that we've done as part of our workforce strategy is to try and delegate decision-making further down the organisation around people. So we're holding people to account now around budgets, which gives them a bit more freedom around headcount and being able to bring the people in that they need as long as it's within their delegated budget. This in turn has freed up a bit of resources in the People Directorate to enable us to look at doing that work around that flexibility that we need. But we also need to think about the flexibility of our workforce and making sure that our workforce is able to respond to the pressures that happen to us today and also in the future. So looking at how we might be able to bring a bit more flexibility into that, both in terms of being able to move people around various directorates and also around the skills that we need, and making sure that we have those people with the skills that we need when we want to deploy them, and looking at that in terms of both our employed staff, but actually also our sort of contingent labour and our support staff that we can call on to help us do that. The other area we're looking at is workforce is our workload and well-being. responding to some of the feedback from the staff survey. We know, particularly in some of our operational and frontline directorates, that staff are feeling under pressure for workload. We know we've referenced some of the issues around IT this morning, and that's compounding the problem. So we want to make sure, as I said, we've got workforce in place that can fill vacancies, so we can fill our vacancies quicker. We want to make sure that we've got the people with the right skills in place, that we need them to do the work that they need to do. And we also want to make sure that our home workers, which is 60% of our workforce, feel connected and don't feel isolated, and feel that they are fully integrated into CQC and feel that they're valued members of the team. So there's quite a lot of work going on in that space, because that is really, really important to ensure that our workforce feel both valued and their well-being is maintained. We've also looking at diversity and inclusion. This is a really important subject and subject matter for us. We've commissioned a report from Roger Klein to look at the experience of our black and ethnic minority colleagues in CQC. That report is now in draft, and we're now doing some work across the organisation with focus groups to look at the recommendations in that, so they can feed into that and help shape that report. And we'll bring that back to the board. I think it's September when we'll have a final report for a really good discussion in that, in terms of what does that actually mean for us in CQC, and what are we actually going to do to turn this around and really make a difference in that space. The other area of work is around our learning and development. As I keep saying, if we need a workforce with the right skills to do the job. So we've been looking at our strategic training needs. The key areas for that are around quality improvement, our regulatory skills programme to ensure that our inspectors are able to go out and do the enforcement and take the regulatory activities that they need to do in the right way, and driving a consistent approach to that. And also around our aspiring managers programme. So really diving deep down into the organisation and looking for those people with the talent to become our managers of the future, and putting a programme in place to support that. So I think it's fair to say there's a lot of work going on in the People Directorate at the moment. This is just a snapshot of some of our key priorities. I'm happy to take questions. I'll do my best to answer them, but Ruth is the expert in this, and if she's not here, if I can't answer them, I can take a note and come back to you after the board. But hopefully I'll be able to do anything not too complex or technical.
So with the threat that if it's too complex or technical, you won't get an answer today anyway. Mark, go on.
Well, thank you, Kirsty. A very, very thorough report. A couple of observations first, if I may. I think it's important that these 6 areas that you've identified, that they don't become initiatives, that they are very much connected to what we're doing in the organisation. So, for instance, when I look at adaptability, I think very much back to our technical and digital strategy and plans, and so it's very connected. If I look at workforce strategy, workload and well-being, diversity and inclusion, then I really would like to see that we would be linking that to some of the challenges we've had back from the Roger Klein paper in terms of our RES standards and the targets we have around selection and development and opportunity for career development. So I really do encourage that we have those linkages. Finally, I'd just like to suggest that we have a greater emphasis on engagement. I'm sure all of these key focus areas are ones that we will be wanting to communicate with our people either directly or through our representative channels. And I think that's an important part. And coming out of these 6 key focus areas, I think there is an opportunity for us to develop some really exciting KPIs, people KPIs that we can report on the progress, because the paper suggests that there will be coming back and reporting on progress against each one of these 6 areas, but actually we could do that through the KPI route and see it for ourselves. So thank you.
Really good points. Thanks, Mark. Andrea.
Thank you, and thank you, Kirsty, for the report, and particularly to Ruth and her team for all of the work that goes behind it. And the comment that I wanted to make was that whilst this is the people strategy and it sits with Ruth in terms of the leadership of that, it's not something that those of us who are responsible for other directorates think is Kirsty and Ruth's job and we don't have to engage. So it's just to kind of give that reassurance to the board that each of the directorates has got a people lead. That's Sue Howard for me, one of my deputy chief inspectors, works very closely with Ruth and the rest of the team to make sure that all of those initiatives are, sorry, I used that word, Mark, I apologise, all of those priorities are taken on board within the directorate and that we're actively contributing to that. And that also helps with the communications point that Mark just raised as well, to make sure that we're being consistent across the organisation around that. But I would just like to end by saying thank you for the work that everybody's doing in the People Directorate. It's enormously helpful and important to us.
Thanks, Andrea. John.
Thank you. It's a very good report. Thank you to Ruth. Just wanted to flag up that induction and training was an issue raised in the report we considered earlier, and increasingly it will be important that consideration is given to how that's handled as you wish to develop a quality improvement culture and the protocols and so on. And I note it's not specifically mentioned within learning and development, but I wouldn't want us to lose sight of the fact that it is really quite an important part of what will happen as the strategy unfolds.
Thank you, Robert.
Like everyone else, I think this is a very good report, and I was particularly encouraged to see the work that you're doing in relation to staff well-being. You referred there to the dangers and risks of isolation and the opposite of that, I suppose, connectedness. And I just ask for an assurance that as we move forward with digital transformation and all singing and all dancing, this, that and the other, we remember that connectedness in relation to well-being often means real connection actually between human beings actually meeting and seeing each other and working together and talking together, as opposed just to communicating and connecting through social media and pressing buttons. But I'm sure that is there. But actually, can we ensure that when we think about digital strategy and so on, we include in that and integrate into that a consideration of well-being?
Yeah. Do you want to respond to that? Sorry.
Yeah, if I just pick up some of those points. So, Mark, in response to your question around these are not initiatives, they are what we do, and I think that's right. What we've actually done is, as part of the sort of overall sort of change programme of work, is incorporated a people line into that. So everything we do has a people aspect as part of it, so that we are really embedding the sort of people impact and really assessing that and making sure that all the things that we do, we think about people as part of that, and that is a work stream and with a comms line attached to it, and that will start to pick up as we move through the change programme. In terms of your point about connectedness, I think you're absolutely right. And one of the key areas of that piece of work is actually also giving line managers the skills to equip people to manage remote teams effectively. And that is it's a different style of management from assuming you have people in the office every day. And it's about making sure we train them as part of that, get them, and so they know that they can't just leave people to their own devices and pick up the phone once a week. It is about getting people into the office, is getting teams together and really building that sense of team, even if it is a dispersed team, but really making sure that people feel part of something. And there is work in that piece of work to look at that. Induction and training, I think it's probably it's one of those, I call it the sort of road surfacing bit. It's key. We have to do it, and it is part of our training programme. I suppose our specific learning needs analysis, these are the new things or new initiatives that are coming in, and there's some sort of prerequisites that we have in our training programme, and that is one of them in terms of the induction piece. But we will go back and just check to make sure it is fully up to date with the QI initiatives and things like that.
Thank you. Jane.
My comment was about the workforce strategy and the very welcome news that as regards recruitment, that would be delegated to directorates. That's been a real sort of issue and a challenge for a small organisation like Healthwatch within the CQC family. One of the issues that I surprised myself, because this could be one of those complex and technical issues that you can pass on. One of the issues, as I understand it, was that when we are recruiting Healthwatch, we also look across the redundancy pool stretches across the whole of the organisation. I just wondered whether that would actually mitigate, still having that presumably, would mitigate against having individual directorates able to make recruitment decisions and move more quickly.
So I think this is a technical question that I will pass on, but I will just. I think there are rules and regulations around if you've got people in redeployment pools and you're looking to recruit, you have to go into that pool first, and that's just part of the legislation and the sort of people rules that we have to apply to. So it's just one of those things we have to do.
So I think just to sort of pull this together, we have a strategy. We don't have a digital strategy, a people strategy, and so on, separate from each other. We have a strategy which are very connected, and I think the points that you made, Mark, and others in different ways were absolutely spot on. So this needs to be joined up, and it is. And I think your point about KPIs in the people space as well as in the digital space and in all the other spaces is really important. So thank you for that. Ruth isn't here, but I'd like to echo thoughts that came from that side of the table, that she and her team have done a lot of good work, as have lots of other people. This is really, really important. Our people are really, really important. And I think we will probably have a regular update at every future meeting, as we do with digital and other things, so we know we're keeping this absolutely top of mind. But thanks, Kirsty, for what you've been doing as well. David, you had one piece of information you needed to raise.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So one item of any other business. Unfortunately, yesterday evening our website went down, and what that means is that there's no members of the public that can get access to our website. Indeed, while we've been in the meeting, for me to check whether it's being put back up again, there's a letter from a member of the public saying, "Dear Mr. B, and I can't get on your website. I keep getting 404 not found." And so that's the significance of that. There are members of the public that be wanting to source information about the services that we regulate, and they're not able to do that at the present time. People are working hard to do that. I'd hope that Kate could get back to me and say, don't worry, it's going to be fixed in the next 10 minutes. But given she's been gone, we'll need to send out a St Bernard for it. That I don't think I'm going to be able to say that. The other consequence of this is from the report that we considered earlier in relation to Hill Green. The plan was that would be made public by going on our website this morning. So there's a big outward-facing issue for members of the public who depend on our website, and the decision that we've made this morning in relation to the publication of our response, that was our commitment that we'd publish that independent report. We're not able to do that as well. We will look at workarounds in relation to this, but the important thing is to get the website back up and running, and that's where the energy and focus will be. You can say it's up and running?
No, but we have a workaround in place which should be up any minute now. They said it would be an hour to get it up and running. That was an hour ago.
Okay. So hopefully before certainly board colleagues, whether members of the public can do this, I use can't now, but anyway, hopefully we can get something out.
Right, pause for a second. Kate, come and whisper in Sir David's ear.
I'm told it will be back up in the next few hours, but so let's see. So I think we've obviously got a workaround from Kirsty. Kate's saying from the team that are working on this, we've got a good to go, but it will take time to get it up and running. So But it is important, I told the board, and it's important I did that in public session. I know this isn't broadcast live, so this isn't real-time dissemination of the information, but it just puts on the record. And then I can make this commitment because I won't be here, but at the next board I think there'll be an update on what happened, why it happened, what has been done to fix it, and if for goodness sake this ever happens again, what the contingency is. We cannot afford to be in this position, quite frankly, in my view. But the important thing is let's get the thing up and running this morning, and critically, let's honour our commitment to get the Hill Green report out in the way it does. So I'm very sorry, members of the public, there's some here, but it's people that rely on our website that we've not given them the service that they require, and I think that's a key issue. I'm sure, I don't need to say I'm disappointed, because I'm sure everybody's disappointed, including the people trying to get this up and running. So I think our emotions and energy should go into getting it up and running and getting on with it.
So disappointed isn't the adjective I would have used, but you're absolutely right, David. The first thing is to get it up and running again as quickly as possible, and then we'll do all the investigation. Any other business anybody wanted to raise? I have one other piece of other business, but John, go on.
I just wanted to commend and thank the executive for switching from plastic cups to paper cups after some inquiries about that.
Well, there you go. So I was going to just comment on the fact, David, this is your last board meeting.
I thought I'd escape.
Well, if I had forgotten rather, which I hadn't, you reminded me about 30 seconds ago anyway, because you said you wouldn't be here next month. So, but I hadn't forgotten. And I was just thinking, if you were able to produce a performance report for the first board meeting you were at. I mean, you wouldn't have been able to because you wouldn't have got the data probably, but if you had and compared it with the performance report that you produced today, the journey that's been travelled under your leadership is just phenomenal. And then if you went back to the early reports from the PAC and the most recent report on the PAC, again, an external, not usually uncritical group of people. The journey that's been travelled under your leadership is just phenomenal. So I won't dwell at huge length, but I do think as a board we should note the incredible achievements under your leadership. Thank you hugely for all you've done for this organisation, and wish you every success in your next career.
Thank you, Peter.
So if when eventually this gets up on the website, Ian, if you're watching at that time, you've got a hard act to follow. Let me make that quite clear. I've been notified of some questions from the public. We're running horribly late, so we're going to have to keep it a little bit brief. But I don't know, Ms. Maxwell, is she here? No. Right. So in that case, we won't deal with that question now. Andrew, you are here, so can you really, in just 1 minute, ask a question, please?
Mr. Wyman, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Andrew Ward, and I have a background in public protection. Recently, Baroness Dido Harding, Chair of NHS Improvement, has signalled her intention to drive change, and is now leading the move of NHS Improvement away from being, and I'm quoting from her report to her board last month, a pure regulator, to more emphasis as an improvement agency. Meanwhile, both the General Medical Council and the Nursing and Midwifery Council have each faced scathing criticism in 2018 for their ineffective and overbearing regulation or lack of regulation enforcement. That leaves the Care Quality Commission. Does the Commission see its primary role as a regulator or as an improvement organisation? And a little example came to my mind the other week, looking at Twitter. How does sending more than 70 CQC colleagues, and that's a quote from Dame Jacqueline Doherty, Chief Executive of London North West, University Healthcare NHS Trust, who tweeted that on the 5th of June. To an NHS Trust for several days, enhance regulation assurance and improve quality. And this is my observation, this is probably an opinion, but this is just a personal thing. Or is the reality that the CQC does neither and is poor value for money? Thank you.
So Parliament, to answer your first question, Parliament is really clear. If you go to the 2008 Act that set us up, it says as our primary objective we are a regulator. It's in Section 3 of the Act. The second objective is to encourage improvement. So I think we're absolutely clear as a Commission. Those are the obligations. And I think we do both. And I think we've already had, Steve was showing earlier, the driving improvement in general practice. We do a lot of improvement work, but our primary role, as set out by Parliament, is to ensure the safety and well-being of service users. As to whether we're poor value for money, I would just refer you to the NAO report of last November in value for money on this organisation, which I think overall was a pretty positive endorsement about what we do. So I hope those are quick answers to your questions. And then very, very quickly, Robin, you had a question you wanted to ask. If you can do it even more quickly than Andrew, that would be fantastic.
Thank you, Chairman. Robin Pike, Health Watch Hertfordshire. It's a question about the developments in technology within the Commission, and specifically with reference to the website. A somewhat apposite question, Chairman, possibly. I recently searched for key lines of inquiry, and there were several hundred results. The leading result was headed with the name Nigel, and not a name I was familiar with, and this person seemed to be associated with quite a number of primary medical practices.
So Robin, sorry to interrupt you. Can you just be really brief in the question?
Yes. When is the website going to be updated?
So we would agree with you that the website, even when it's up, is quite difficult to navigate your way around. So it is an absolute priority to improve the website. But I think it's important to understand that the whole approach to developing the technology is quite a connected set of issues. So you won't see suddenly a new website, but you will see improvements. Kirsty, I don't know if you want to add to that or anybody else, or whether that's a sufficient answer for now.
I think it's part of our digital portfolio and we're working on that at the moment in terms of working out our priorities and what the dependencies are to ensure that when we do stuff, it actually works.
So we'll have a longer conversation outside the meeting if you like, but I really do need to bring this to an end because we are hugely over time. Thank you very much for coming today, and thanks to the board.